Louisiana State Penitentiary, commonly known as Angola, is not only the largest maximum security prison in the United States, but also one of the most notorious. Located in a remote part of Louisiana on a former slave plantation, the prison covers 18,000 acres and houses over 6,000 inmates. Angola's reputation for harsh conditions and its treatment of inmates has earned it a place among the most infamous correctional facilities in the world. Angola's notoriety stems from a combination of its historical roots, severe treatment of inmates, and its extensive use of forced labor. The prison's connection to its past as a plantation is evident in its operations, with inmates often referring to it as the farm due to the large-scale agricultural work performed by the prisoners. Angola has a grim history that dates back to its origins as a plantation. The land on which the prison now sits was originally part of a series of plantations that operated in the 19th century. The plantation was named Angola after the African country from which many of the enslaved people who worked there were taken. During its time as a plantation, the conditions for the enslaved individuals were brutal and inhumane. Enslaved people were forced to work long hours in the fields under the hot sun, cultivating crops such as cotton and sugarcane. They lived in rudimentary shacks, received minimal food, and faced severe punishments, including whippings and other forms of physical abuse for any perceived infractions. The plantation system was designed to extract the maximum amount of labor from the enslaved individuals, with little regard for their well-being. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, the state of Louisiana acquired the land and converted it into a prison in 1880. The transition from a plantation to a penitentiary did not significantly improve the conditions for those forced to labor on the land. In fact, the prison system adopted many of the same harsh labor practices used during slavery. The prison continued to operate much like a plantation, with inmates working the fields and producing crops under the supervision of armed guards. The use of inmate labor was justified under the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery, but allowed involuntary servitude as a punishment for crime. This loophole enabled the prison to maintain a system of forced labor that closely resembled slavery. Inmates at Angola were required to perform grueling work in the fields, often with little or no pay. The conditions were harsh, with minimal attention given to the health and safety of the prisoners. While there have been some changes in the structure and administration of the prison over the years, many aspects of life at Angola remain similar to its plantation past. The use of forced labor, the harsh conditions, and the severe punishments all harken back to the days when the land was worked by enslaved people. The prison has faced numerous lawsuits and federal oversight attempts to address these issues, but many problems persist. The characterization of Angola as a modern-day plantation is not without merit. The forced labor system, where inmates work long hours in the fields for minimal pay, closely resembles the exploitative practices of the plantation era. The harsh disciplinary measures and the overall lack of regard for inmate welfare further reinforce this comparison. Angola is notorious not only for its harsh conditions, but also for the severe sentencing policies that dictate the lives of its inmates. The prison's approach to sentencing, the extensive use of life sentences without parole. In Louisiana, life sentences typically mean life without the possibility of parole. Once sentenced to life at Angola, inmates face the reality that they will likely never be released. This policy applies broadly, encompassing various serious offenses, especially violent crimes such as murder, assault, and armed robbery. Louisiana's 3 strikes law can lead to life sentences for repeat offenders, even if the third offense is nonviolent. This law contributes to the high number of inmates serving life sentences at Angola. Louisiana has also sentenced juveniles to life without parole, reflecting a particularly harsh stance. Despite some recent changes in laws addressing juvenile sentencing, many individuals sentenced as juveniles remain in Angola without the possibility of release. Henry Montgomery, sentenced to life without parole at 17 for killing a sheriff's deputy, Montgomery's case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled in Montgomery v. Louisiana, 2016, that mandatory life without parole for juveniles was unconstitutional. Despite the ruling, Montgomery faced prolonged legal struggles before being granted parole in 2021 after spending nearly 60 years in prison. Glenn Ford, wrongfully convicted of murder and sentenced to death, Ford spent nearly 30 years on death row before being exonerated and released in 2014. His case highlights the extreme consequences of the harsh sentencing policies at Angola. The vast majority of inmates serving life sentences at Angola will die within its walls. The life means life policy ensures that many never experience freedom again. Only a small number of inmates are granted clemency or parole, usually due to extraordinary circumstances or after lengthy legal battles. Angola epitomizes the harsh realities of the American penal system. The severe sentencing policies, including life without parole and lengthy sentences for repeat offenders, ensure that many inmates will never leave the prison. The daily conditions, from forced labor to inadequate health care and minimal sunlight, contribute to an environment that is both physically and psychologically punishing. The presence of a hospice program underscores the inevitability of death for many inmates within the prison walls, offering a rare glimpse of compassion in an otherwise brutal setting. Angola houses a mix of the most dangerous and long-term inmates in Louisiana. This includes lifers. A significant number of inmates are serving life sentences without parole for violent crimes such as murder, rape, and armed robbery. Death row. Inmates. Angola is home to Louisiana's death row, where inmates await execution under strict conditions. Long-term sentences. Many inmates are serving decades-long sentences for serious offenses, creating a population that is deeply entrenched in the prison system. The conditions inside Angola are exceptionally harsh and reflect the prison's punitive philosophy. Angola is known for its severe overcrowding. Inmates are often housed in large dormitories with up to 90 individuals per dorm. These dormitories are cramped, with little personal space, leading to heightened tensions and violence. Individual cells, where they exist, are small and sparsely furnished. Inmates sleep on metal bunks with thin mattresses, if provided at all. The cells are often poorly ventilated and can become extremely hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Sanitation is a major issue. Many facilities are outdated and in disrepair, leading to unsanitary conditions. Inmates frequently contend with limited access to clean water and inadequate bathroom facilities, which exacerbates health issues and disease spread. Access to healthcare is severely limited. Inmates often face long waits for medical attention, and the quality of care is substandard. Chronic illnesses and mental health issues are frequently left untreated, leading to a deteriorating overall health condition among the prison population. Mental health services are minimal. The high-stress environment and lack of support contribute to significant mental health issues, including depression and anxiety. Suicide and self-harm incidents are not uncommon. A federal judge has repeatedly ruled that the medical care at Angola violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Despite these rulings, the prison has been slow to implement necessary changes, resulting in continued suffering for many inmates. Violence among inmates is a persistent problem. Overcrowding and the high-stress environment lead to frequent fights and assaults. The presence of gangs and the availability of contraband further fuel this violence. The prison employs harsh disciplinary measures. Solitary confinement is used extensively as punishment, where inmates are isolated for up to 23 hours a day in small, windowless cells. This practice has severe psychological effects. Reports of guard brutality are common. Inmates often face physical abuse and excessive use of force from prison staff. These abuses contribute to an atmosphere of fear and repression. Inmates follow a strict daily schedule that includes early wake-up calls, roll calls, meals, and labor. The day at Angola starts early, typically around 5:30 a.m. Inmates are woken up by guards and must quickly get ready for the day. An immediate roll call follows, where inmates must stand at attention and be accounted for. Breakfast is served in a communal setting. Meals are basic and often lack nutritional variety. Breakfast might include items such as grits, eggs, and bread. Lunch is another communal meal. Like breakfast, it is basic and often repetitive. Meals typically include staples like rice, beans, and occasionally some protein like chicken or pork. After lunch, inmates return to their work assignments. The labor is strenuous and continues until late in the afternoon. Dinner is served in the early evening and is similar in quality and variety to the other meals. Free time is minimal and activities are heavily monitored. Recreational activities are limited. While there are some opportunities for exercise and sports, these are restricted and often overshadowed by the demands of labor and the general oppressive environment. Angola has a notable religious program, including the famous Angola Prison Rodeo, which is held twice a year. While these activities provide some relief, they do little to mitigate the overall harshness of life inside the prison. By 9 p.m., inmates are typically back in their cells or dormitories. The lights are turned off, and the prison goes into lockdown mode. Angola employs strict and often brutal disciplinary measures. Inmates who violate rules are often placed in solitary confinement, where they spend 23 hours a day in a small, windowless cell. This practice can last for weeks or even months, leading to severe psychological distress. There are numerous reports of guards using excessive force against inmates. Physical beatings and other forms of mistreatment are not uncommon, contributing to an atmosphere of fear and repression. The oppressive environment contributes to high rates of self-harm among inmates. The psychological stress of living under constant surveillance and harsh conditions can lead to desperate actions. Louisiana State Penitentiary stands as a stark example of the extremes of the American penal system. The combination of severe overcrowding, forced labor, inadequate health care, and pervasive violence creates an environment that is both physically and psychologically damaging to inmates. Despite the introduction of some programs aimed at rehabilitation, the overall conditions at Angola highlight significant challenges and raise serious ethical and human rights concerns. Angola's reputation as one of the worst prisons in the United States underscores the urgent need for comprehensive prison reform and a reevaluation of the treatment of inmates within the system.